everyone, it's Katrina. The real-life version of Lara Croft Tomb Raider is coming at you. Join me today as I tell you about some real-life villains and heroes raiding the tombs of ancient history, from the Amazon jungle to the Egyptian desert. Then at the end, you can decide on the morality of tomb raiders. The Nazi treasure hunters. What I'm about to tell you is so crazy that it might just be true. On the other hand, it might be completely made up. Listen to the story and then I'll let you be the judge. A rumor has been spreading that the Vatican holds secrets of an advanced civilization in its archives. The Vatican supposedly knows about a race of highly intelligent creatures that lived in our solar system 100,000 years ago. Geneticists from their advanced civilization created human beings from the DNA of monkeys to work as slaves on Earth, Mars, and Venus. The aliens themselves lived on a different planet, one that's currently hidden in an asteroid belt at the edge of the solar system. Presumably, this would be the Planet X that everyone's talking about. Once the aliens were done with humans, they abandoned them, us, to our fates. Those on Mars and Venus perished. The humans on Earth were smart enough to develop their own form of intelligence. They evolved and created a civilization that survives to this day. It's a theory or a story very similar to the one of the Anunnaki gods, who created humans as slaves to mine for gold. While many believe the theory, or some aspects of it, I should point out the scientific impossibilities. There is a long fossil record that shows the gradual evolution of humans over the last 3 million years. Humans do appear to have evolved on Earth naturally, but who knows? Maybe modern scientists are wrong. Stranger things have happened. There is also a rumor that the Vatican's secret archives contain the truth about Nazi missions to North Africa and Antarctica in search of alien artifacts. The Nazis supposedly found the relics they were looking for, unbelievable objects and weird pieces of technology that predate known human civilization. What happened to these objects is anybody's guess. There are no official records of the Nazis discovering alien tech on any continent, never mind Antarctica. In North Africa, the Nazis supposedly found proof that the first pharaohs were actually aliens. It's a great sci-fi story, but not likely to be true. Modern Syrian smugglers. Tomb raiding, treasure hunting, and archaeological thievery are still big problems in some parts of the world, particularly in Syria, where chaos erupted in 2013. Looters attacked every ancient site they could and stripped them of goods. Within 2 years, Syria was at the brink of running out of things to steal. It did run out, and what's happening now is a reflection of that. The global market is currently flooded with fraudulent antiques because the tomb raiders ran out of ancient sites to pillage. Now, in cities like Damascus and Aleppo, there are workshops that manufacture all varieties of relics. Things like black magic sorcery books, copper Bibles, Crusader-era works of art, and gorgeous stone statues. Dr. Mamoun Abdul Karim from a museum in Damascus said 80% of antiquities smuggled out of Syria are fake. Nobody even knows where all the real relics have gone, which is a major shame. Syria belonged to the cradle of civilization. It has cities like Dura Europos, the Pompei of the Syrian desert. Other cities like Mari, estimated at around 5,000 years old, have been completely destroyed due to conflict. Sadly, this is the modern reality of illegal tomb raiding. Keep that in mind the next time someone offers you a discount book of black magic spells from Syria. The failed tomb raider. People have been robbing tombs since tombs first started being built. 1,300 years ago in China, a man tried to tunnel into a tomb, only to meet a terrible fate. He wasn't found until now. Archaeologists stumbled upon the ancient mystery totally by accident. They were excavating a newly discovered tomb in China's Ningxia region when they uncovered a tomb raider's shaft. Inside the shaft was the tomb raider. It isn't that unusual to find tunnels dug by thieves in ancient days. It is unusual, however, to find the tomb raider still hanging out in their own tunnel. Researchers think the guy was 25 years old. They also think he may have been murdered. At first, it looked like an accident. Around the year 640, a young man tried to steal treasure from the tomb and wound up buried inside his own tunnel when it collapsed. It seemed like a no-brainer situation. Only it wasn't. When archaeologists started analyzing the thief's skeleton, they realized something more nefarious had happened. He had been stabbed multiple times. I say multiple, but it was more like a ton. This tomb raider had more holes in him than Swiss cheese. Scientists had to come up with a new explanation for what happened. The way the raider's body was slumped in the tunnel made them think he was likely stabbed and left to bleed out. But why? He may have gotten into business with some bad men. After the tunnel was dug and the treasure was looted, the man's business partners killed him and left him underground. He may not have been a thief at all. He may have caught the tomb raiders in the act and been killed for it. It would have been the perfect crime, too, hiding his body in a tomb where nobody would find it. And if they did find it, they wouldn't think anything of it. As for the tomb itself, it dates to the 1st century AD, during the East Han Dynasty. There isn't anything very exciting about it. The tomb raiders stole all of the goodies from inside, so there's nothing left. Lara Croft, aka Joan Howard. Joan Howard was the real-life version of everybody's favorite video game archaeologist and butt-kicker, Lara Croft. Some people even call her Indiana Joan for her exploits as a young woman. Get it? Indiana Joan. She used to be a hero, a role model for young women interested in a life of adventure and digging up ancient graves. But in 2017, when Joan was 95 years old, she came under attack. As it turns out, tomb raiders are not historically the most ethical people. Joan was accused of stealing artifacts from sites in Egypt, Jordan, Israel, Palestine, and Syria. Her activities in the 1960s and 1970s were supposedly illegal. Not just that, but also deeply offensive to the cultures whose treasure she was actively stealing. Archaeologist Peter Campbell said that yes, what Joan did was illegal. She started her career in 1967. 3 years later came the UNESCO Convention. It made the removal of artifacts from the ground for collection against international law. Archaeologists were still allowed to take objects from burials. They just weren't allowed to pocket them and bring the relics home. It's not a finders keepers way of doing things anymore. Not like it was when Howard Carter found King Tut in 1922. Joan was still an adventurer by every definition. She and her husband, a senior official with the United Nations, were posted to an undisclosed location in the Middle East. Joan then spent the next 11 years traveling from one archaeological zone to another, searching for antiquities. She had epic adventures, explored new lands, made new friends, and collected some ancient trinkets along the way. But as of 2017, Joan was officially being looked into by the Australian government. She was accused of using her husband's diplomatic status to steal things that belong to other cultures. What are your thoughts on this sensitive issue? Joan is now 100 years old. Was she a thief who deserves punishment? Or was Joan a bright-eyed thrill-seeker like Lara Croft, only without the pistols? Let me know in the comments. And now for a quick break because it's shout-out time! I want to give a big thank you to Kyle Brown for the generous super thanks. It really means a lot. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family. The Silver Pharaoh. Are you sick of hearing about Howard Carter and his expedition in 1922 to reveal Tutankhamun's tomb? If so, you're in luck. Today I'm going to tell you about another ancient Egyptian pharaoh who was discovered in 1940 by a French archaeologist you likely have never even heard of. Chaos of World War II that Pierre Montet avoided guns and sought adventure in Tanis, Egypt. Hey, who could blame him for choosing the shovel over the grenade? While there, Pierre made an extraordinary revelation in the world of Egyptology. What he found was on par with King Tut's tomb in terms of magnitude. But because of the war, nobody cared. The discovery just sort of faded into the background. It was like trying to tell someone about your recent promotion at a funeral. Not the right time. Pierre discovered the tomb of Pharaoh Susenes I, also known as the Silver Pharaoh. He was the third ruler of the 21st dynasty, a time when Egypt was in utter turmoil. This was approximately between 1047 and 1001 BC. The reason I say turmoil is that the Egyptian government was fractured. The country was split in half. The pharaoh and his friends ruled Lower Egypt from Tanis. And meanwhile, the high priest of Amun ruled Upper Egypt from his stronghold in Thebes. Because of this political strife, most historians assumed the pharaohs of the south hadn't wielded much power. Then came Pierre and his discovery of Suceni's tomb. You won't believe all the treasure that was buried with this guy. Did you know that in ancient Egypt, gold was thought of as the flesh of gods? And did you know that silver was believed to be the very bones of the gods? It's true that silver was more valuable because the Egyptians had so much gold and not as much silver. They could only get silver by importing it from Western Asia and the Mediterranean. When a king or a queen is found covered in gold, it's a big deal, but not as spectacular. In the case of Suceni's I, he was discovered in a solid silver coffin. The ruler was buried in a silver box that must have cost a fortune. He might as well have been found buried in a huge pile of cash. His coffin is a testament to his wealth. It also shows that the pharaohs of Lower Egypt may have had more control than historians previously thought. There were other treasures too, like gold artifacts and spectacular funerary items. Unlike King Tut, the mummy of Suceni's did not survive. Inside his silver coffin were his scattered, disassembled bones. The tomb raiders of Pompei. There is more to the ancient Roman city of Pompei than meets the eye. Underneath the ruins, which themselves are still largely hidden underneath volcanic debris, is a network of passages. The underground tunnels were chiseled out by savage tomb raiders in the 18th century. Not the good kind of tomb raiders either. It was brutal work, like toiling away in the mines. They burrowed through thick layers of ash and black pumice stone with only candlelight to guide them, all in search of treasure. The raiders gouged through walls decorated in paintings going back 2,000 years. You can think of them like archaeological pirates. They were even hired by a notorious group of aristocrats known as the Spanish Bourbon Dynasty. This level of covert thievery always has a kingpin at one end. The Spanish Bourbon Dynasty is a whole situation that I'll have to get into another time. For now, the important thing to know is that they ruled Naples in the 18th and 19th centuries. They were similar to the Medici family in their dominion over their little slice of Italy. In 1738, the Bourbons started hiring thieves to tunnel like moles through the city of Pompei. The Bourbons were obsessed with ancient Roman relics, which they would have cleaned up and displayed in their mansions and villas. Just a few months ago, one of the tomb raiders' tunnels was discovered. Real professional archaeologists at Pompei still haven't reached some of the depths that the thieves reached. Why is it taking the pros so long? Because they are meticulous and take care of every single inch. The new tunnel was found inside the ruins of an enormous villa that was blanketed in ash during the eruption of 79 AD. The tunnel bored through parts of the villa like a rat trying to find its way out of a sandcastle. Archaeologists don't know what the raiders found 200 years ago during their digging. Maybe nothing. Maybe unimaginable treasure. The villa itself belonged to a Roman politician who controlled a merchant empire within Pompei, so we know he was probably really, really rich. The Queen of the Amazon. They call her the Queen of the Jungle. With a machete in one hand and a compass in the other, landmines scattered in the foliage and bullets whizzing over her head, Ella al-Shamahi hacks through the Amazonian jungle. She is a real-life tomb raider, and the closest living example of an Indiana Jones-type paleoanthropologist. Ella's missions have taken her to some of the most inhospitable territories in the world. She'll hunt for treasure in war zones and go to the most remote places that nobody else has heard of. Her most recent expedition brought Ella, who happens to be a National Geographic explorer, into the heart of the Amazon. She bushwhacked through Colombia, Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru. She was hunting for a lost jungle kingdom. Ella wanted to find evidence of crumbling citadels buried underneath the roots of Amazonian giant trees. Ella is convinced that the Amazon was home to a civilization much more powerful than you can imagine. She said the Amazon hasn't been a pristine wilderness in thousands of years. It was cultivated by an indigenous group long before Europeans arrived. The indigenous people had farmland, urban developments, and towering cities. Ella said the urban sprawl was huge. And then, suddenly, the people disappeared. They abandoned their cities and their civilization crumbled. By the time Europeans arrived, the only people left in the Amazon were tribes who looked like they belonged in the Stone Age. They gave up city life to live in thatched shacks under the trees. Ella is not the only person who believes the Amazon was populated in ancient times. Archaeologists have been making discovery after discovery of cities hidden underneath the jungle, abandoned for more than 1,000 years. All of Amazonia may have been populated by a sophisticated society, one that even had highways leading from city to city. During her recent trek, Ella battled jungle critters. She was practically eaten alive by bugs, but she found ancient examples of rock art, strange images of animals, and geometric shapes. While she didn't find the lost city of Zee or El Dorado, she still found bits and pieces of evidence along the trail that people had been thriving in the forest thousands of years ago. Ella has been on plenty of other expeditions that cement her as a real-life Lara Croft as well. She sailed along pirate routes and literally dodged bullets. She had to negotiate with rebel forces to escape the forest while investigating an illegal gold mine in Colombia. Raiders discover ancient eggs. Real-life tomb raiders in China recently discovered something really weird. It's weird even for this channel, and I talk about some pretty weird stuff here. The scientists behind the discovery work with the Nanjing Archaeological Institute. They opened a tomb in eastern China near the ancient capital of Nanjing. The ancient and modern capital share the same name, but the older city dates back 2,500 years or more. It was already a shining metropolis before Alexander the Great was born. During the excavations, the archaeologists uncovered a large clay jar. Cue the creepy music! Inside the old, cracked, slightly funky-smelling jar were some eggs. 20 greenish-blue eggs. The jar and its eggs were found almost at the bottom of a 6-leveled ancient burial complex. Researchers have already found 38 chamber tombs inside, with the eggs practically in the basement of this place. At the very bottom are the tombs of people who were buried around 770 BC. What a lot of people don't realize is that in China, there are tombs so epic they rival the ones of ancient Egypt. You just don't hear about them as much. Let's look at what was found near the eggs. In the same tomb, archaeologists found a set of cookware. It was like what you would expect to see on display at an ancient Chinese Bed Bath & Beyond. Researchers said whoever was buried here must have been wealthy. They had a full cooking set with pots, cups, plates, and other cookware. Everything in the tomb points to a Chinese death ritual. I know it sounds ominous, but it might not be as frightening as you think. Ancient Chinese cultures believed death was a cosmological disruption. When a person died, it messed up the universal harmony. They would conduct rituals to try and re-establish that harmony. Part of the ritual was to purify the body. Whoever was buried in the egg tomb would have been bathed after death. Then they were left with a small supply of food so they wouldn't starve to death in the afterlife. So that's why this man had so many eggs and pieces of cookware. He was supposed to eat his eggs on his way to heaven. There is one more thing you should know about eggs in ancient China. 5,000 years ago, people in China painted eggs and offered them as gifts to the gods at the beginning of spring, very near to the equinox. They celebrated their own version of Easter 3,000 years before Jesus Christ was born. Ancient China was celebrating Easter before Judaism was even around. And so were the Romans and the Greeks. Every spring, Greeks and Romans would leave colorful eggs around their homes as decorations to celebrate the coming of new life. Discovering the ancient reptilians. In 1919, Harry Reginald Howell made some discoveries that to this day remain controversial. He was the first man to excavate the Al-Ubaid site in southern Iraq, not far from the ancient Sumerian city of Ur. This was the center of the cradle of civilization. So then, why did the statues Harry found in the ruins depict lizard kings instead of human kings? Let me back up and start at the beginning. The most widely accepted view today in mainstream archaeology is that civilization began with Sumer in what is currently Iraq. It began with the prehistoric Ubaidian culture who started building small settlements around 7,500 years ago. As the culture advanced, they grew more sophisticated. The small settlements grew into villages. The villages evolved into towns. Temples started rising from the dust. Monumental buildings were constructed. And suddenly, the Sumerian civilization had taken shape, and the cities of Eridu, Ur, and Uruk were the largest and most powerful on the globe. So let's focus on the Ubaidians, who paved their streets and developed agriculture. Here's what their villages look like today. This is a picture of Tel al-Ubaid taken by David Stanley. It isn't much more than a few lumps of crusty dirt that have been cooked for 1,000 years by the sun. It was here, though, on this parched piece of desert, that Harry uncovered curious figurines more than a century ago. Harry found figurines depicting men and women wearing helmets and unusual outfits. They clearly were meant to be members of a ruling class. Each figurine exuded an air of regalness. These weren't humans, though. They were reptilian figurines. One of the strangest is this one here, the figurine of a naked lizard woman nursing a child. And the child is also a lizard. It was carved at least 6,000 years ago. Mainstream archaeologists dismiss the figurines as effigies of gods. The serpent was a major symbol to the Ubaidians. In later Sumerian myth, the god Enki was a snake. There was also a snake cult, an ancient secret society known as the Brotherhood of the Snake. Sure, there could be a connection between the cult and Ubaid lizardmen, but what if things go deeper? These lizard people are the inspiration for ancient alien enthusiasts to support the idea that aliens in the form of lizards came to Earth and helped kickstart humanity. Where do you stand on this? Let me know in the comments below. The Tomb Raider Temple. Ta Prohm is the literal Tomb Raider temple, the one used in the 2001 film starring Angelina Jolie. It's become one of the most famous temples in the world because of its appearance in the movie. But there is so much more to this ancient ruin than just being a film set. Ta Prohm was built by the Khmer Empire in 1186 AD, at the absolute height of the Southeast Asian kingdom. King Jayavarman VII commissioned the temple as a Buddhist monastery, a place where monks and others could go to learn the secrets of the great Buddha. Even with its popularity and fame, new things are being found at the temple all the time. The most recent discovery came during an excavation by specialists with Cambodia's Apsara National Authority. They discovered 100 fragments from broken sandstone sculptures. The sculptures are mainly of Buddha, either in the seated or standing position. But there are also some Nagas, the spiritual serpent guardians of ancient Khmer legend. Speaking of legend, Ta Prohm is home of the controversial dinosaur carving. On one of the temple's walls are a series of hand-sized carvings of animals. There are monkeys and other jungle critters. And then there is a dinosaur, a monster that looks identical to a stegosaurus with triangular plates sticking up from its back. Some believe Ta Prohm's dinosaur is proof that the Khmer lived alongside prehistoric beasts. Others are more skeptical, saying the dinosaur was meant to be a rhinoceros. Maybe it was just a bad artist. Stealing the Capstone of Ai. Mer-Nefer I was the longest reigning pharaoh of the 13th dynasty. He ruled Egypt from 1701 until 1677 BC. Not many people know about him these days, partly because his pyramid is gone. The only thing left of it is the capstone that decorated the top. But it was almost lost too, stolen by fiendish tomb raiders. Very little is known about Mer-Nefer. There are a few mentions of him, with his name popping up on a handful of ancient scarab seals. But there are no manuscripts or monuments telling us about his exploits. Archaeologists have only found his name etched onto things like jars and limestone blocks. Scholars don't know what this guy did during the 23 years he sat on the throne. Remember Pharaoh Susenes I, the king who ruled at a time when Egypt was split in half? Well, archaeologists think Mer-Nefer ruled at a time when the Egyptian government had completely collapsed, just like a house of cards. He may have been the last pharaoh of Egypt's Middle Kingdom before it fell into a long stretch of chaos and lawlessness. Think of it like the Dark Ages after the fall of Rome, when very little of what happened was recorded by scholars. In 1911, Egyptian police near the city of Avaris caught a group of tomb raiders. They had in their possession a pyramidion. A pyramidion was used as the capstone for a particular pyramid, like a big stone hat. They even look like miniature pyramids. The Great Pyramid of Giza had one at some point, though where it is today is a mystery. The pyramidion confiscated from the looters had the name of Mer carved on it, along with an image of him offering something to Horus, the king of the Egyptian gods. There must have been a pyramid that this artifact sat on once, likely dedicated to Mer. The mystery is that nobody has ever found it, which kind of makes you wonder, how do you lose an entire pyramid? Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Since I've already started down the path of crazy theories, I might as well keep going. The original fictitious Tomb Raider, Indiana Jones, has a new game coming out. The game centers around a real theory known as the Great Circle. The theory is just as bizarre as aliens creating humans to work in the mines, yet it's a lot easier to prove. The theory is simple. It states there is a massive circle wrapped across the world. No, not the equator. This circle connects some of the greatest historical sites built by human hands. Along the Great Circle is Giza, Easter Island, Nazca, Sukhothai, and that's just to start. In 1995, Jim Allison published his theory online. He proposed that many of the most important ancient structures can be linked by an unbroken circle. Those sites include Petra in Jordan, the capital of the lost Nabateans, Machu Picchu in Peru, the Oracle of Amun's temple in Egypt, where Alexander the Great was declared the son of Zeus, Angkor Wat, where the dinosaur temple Ta Prohm stands, the first city in Mesopotamia I mentioned earlier, Mohenjo-Daro, where the Indus Valley civilization prospered. The list goes on and on. Even though Jim Allison was the one who came up with the official Great Circle idea, he was a little late to the party. In 1846, scientists came up with the idea that sacred sites were aligned by a global society that functioned like an all-powerful shadow government. If you've been watching my videos lately, you'll remember my discussion on ley lines. This was the precursor to the Great Circle theory. While exciting, neither ley lines nor the Great Circle has ever been proven. Searching for the Queen of the Desert. Wendell Phillips was an all-American adventurer. He was so obsessed with finding the truth that he traveled deep into the windy deserts of Yemen in search of a queen who may not have even existed. Wendell had his whole life figured out by the time he turned 10. How many of us knew what we wanted to be at 20, never mind at 10? He knew that his life would be one big adventure. And while he only lived to be 54 years old, it was an epic 54 years. He began his journey at the University of California studying paleontology. When World War II broke out, Wendell went to the seas with the U.S. Merchant Marines. When the war was over, he put together his first scientific expedition through Africa. It was during this expedition that he met the Aga Khan. The Aga Khan is an ancient title held by the Imam of the Nizari Ismailism Shias, allegedly a direct descendant of the Islamic prophet Muhammad. The Aga Khan told Wendell that he should travel to Arabia, where a great civilization flourished in the 1,000 years before Christ was born. That was exactly what he did. Wendell Phillips, sponsored by Dodge, the Detroit automaking giant, began a trip across the Incense Road. It was like the Silk Road, but specifically for incense, sending goods from India to the Mediterranean. What Wendell wanted to discover more than anything was the truth behind the biblical Queen of Sheba. Depending on which ancient legend you believe, the Queen of Sheba either ruled from her palace in Aksum, Ethiopia, or from her capital Marib in Yemen. The Ethiopians believed the Queen of Sheba was from their own soil, and that she sailed up the Red Sea to meet King Solomon 3,000 years ago. She gave birth to Solomon's son, Menelik, who would later steal the Ark of the Covenant. This is the most well-known myth regarding Sheba, but there is another aspect to it. Ethiopia was under control of the kingdom of Saba, which also dominated Yemen until the 6th century. Some scholars suspect Sheba lived in Yemen, not Ethiopia. Wendell wanted to get to the bottom of the mystery. He began excavating the capital of Marib in 1951, but never found the proof he was looking for. He ended up getting chased out of the country due to tribal conflicts, and sadly, he never returned. To this day, instability has prevented archaeologists from getting to the bottom of Sheba's history. She could still be hiding under Yemen's sandy deserts. Thanks for watching! If you had to pick, who do you like more, Lara Croft or Indiana Jones? Let me know in the comments below. And if you have more time, be sure to stick around for an older video you might have missed. Amorites in ancient Israel. From about 2000 BC until 1600 BC, the Amorites ruled a large part of Mesopotamia. They were the rulers of what is now Syria and Palestine, likely originating from Arabia many centuries before. The details are a little blurry going so far back, but it's believed the Amorites started as a tribe of nomads who brought down the Dynasty around 2004 BC, and then they built their own kingdom. In the Bible, the Amorites are mentioned as the people of Canaan. The Bible also describes them as giants, people of immense stature like cedar trees. And in Deuteronomy, the last book of the Torah, the Amorite king Og is said to be the last of the legendary giants. But the scary part about the Amorites is that they supposedly sacrificed their children to their false gods. Both sons and daughters were slaughtered in the name of false idols. Evidence of this was discovered in 1902 by archaeologist Stuart McAllister at the site of Gezer. He uncovered an ancient altar used by the people of Canaan to worship their gods. And here, he discovered what appeared to be evidence of child sacrifice in the form of infant skeletons. This seems to confirm what the Bible says about the Amorites. They did worship strange gods, and they very well may have sacrificed their own children to appease their thirst for blood. Japan's Calamity Stones. All along Japan's coastline are some terrifying ancient stones. These stones are 300 years old and suggest a great catastrophe had once taken place in the coastal settlements of the land of the rising sun. One of these stones can be found at the edge of Anayoshi, a small Japanese village to the north. Beyond the traditional houses and other buildings is a 10-foot stone tablet standing in the jungle, carved with a grave and unsettling warning. It says, "Remember the calamity of the great tsunamis." It then urges people not to build any homes below the point of the stone, or else they could be swept away in the next storm. These kinds of artifacts have been found all along the coast. Some are as recent as 1896, while others go back much further. Some have been destroyed by earthquakes. Some are being reclaimed by nature, but all of them are terrifying. They act as a warning across every generation not to build too close to the shoreline. But not everyone has listened. According to Itoko Kitahara, a history expert on natural disasters from the Ritsu Meikan University in Kyoto, not everyone heeded the warnings. Many coastal communities ignored the advice and spread to lower ground beneath the tsunami stones. In 2011, many faced the consequences of ignorance when 29,000 people died following a deadly earthquake. These stones are all along the shore to keep people safe, but not everyone wants to take the advice of an ancient rock. Egyptian mummies. Something utterly horrifying happened in Egypt 4,000 years ago. Dozens of men were slaughtered and thrown in a tomb by some desert cliffs near Luxor. It was a mass burial of people who suffered gruesome wounds, something extremely out of place in ancient Egypt. The Egyptians weren't keen on mass burials and preferred to give everyone their own private place to rest. Yet somewhere around 2150 BC in Egypt's Old Kingdom, dozens of men were thrown into a death pit and left to mummify together. It's called the Tomb of the Warriors, located in Deir el-Bahari. It was originally discovered in 1923 and then sealed to keep the disturbing mystery sleeping. It was only recently that archaeologist Salima Ikram with the American University in Cairo opened the tomb once again. She investigated the bodies and has come to a rough conclusion on what happened all those years ago. Salima believes the mass grave contains the victims of civil unrest. Approximately 4,200 years ago, a bloody battle was sparked between regional governors during a particularly dark time in Egyptian history. One of the conflicts of this battle ended the lives of 60 men. There was so much blood and gore, and so much death, that the men were dumped into a pit rather than properly buried. And there, alone in the dark, they all turned into natural mummies. It's shout-out time! I want to say a big thank you to Rose Nelson and David Clark for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about incredible history. The blood of Louis XVI. In Paris in 1793, King Louis XVI of France lost his head. It happened in full view of all the people who had shown up to watch the spectacle. In typical 18th century fashion, those on the scene when King Louis was beheaded rushed to his body and dipped their handkerchiefs in the king's blood. Many years later, one of these morbid souvenirs was discovered by an Italian family. This family had been in possession of a hollow gourd for over a century. The gourd was inscribed with a rather peculiar phrase. On January 21st, Maximilian Bardelot dipped his handkerchief in the blood of Louis XVI after his decapitation. The gourd was also decorated in scenes from the French Revolution. Inside it was one of the blood-soaked handkerchiefs from that fateful day. In 2009, the family sent the handkerchief with Carles Lalueza Fox, an expert in paleogenomics who specializes in ancient DNA. This was a huge order because finding blood from a dead French king is not the easiest thing to do. Of course, there is the mummified heart of Louis XVI's son, but that wasn't about to be swabbed for DNA. Carles had to use the mummified head from Henry IV, who died in 1610. His head was stolen from his grave during the Revolution and then found in the early 1900s at an auction. It was a ghoulish ordeal, and in the end, the blood was not verified as belonging to the king. Researchers believe it was the product of a swindler in the 18th century who sold a random bloody handkerchief. The Zombies of Yorkshire. In 2017, archaeologists announced a shocking discovery. They found knife marks on approximately 137 human bones excavated from the tiny Yorkshire village of Warham Percy in England. The bones were originally found in the 1960s, but only recently were the knife marks identified. At first, researchers weren't sure what they were dealing with. It almost looked like a case of medieval cannibalism, but instead, it looks as though the knife marks had something to do with a fear of zombies. The skeletons date from between the 11th and 14th centuries. This was right before the rise of vampire paranoia in much of Europe. What researchers believe is that the villagers mutilated the bodies of the dead so that they wouldn't rise from their graves. The corpses were dismembered, their bones were mixed up, and the pieces were reburied. This was so that after death, they couldn't put themselves back together again and terrorize the living. The Great Pit of Death. Sir Charles Leonard Woolley excavated the ancient Mesopotamian city of Ur from between 1922 and 1934. Among his discoveries were many tomb chambers without names on them. Any tomb that he could not identify was named a death pit. The most grotesque of these death pits was officially titled PG 1237, but it was dubbed by Woolley as the Great Death Pit. It got its nickname due to the sheer number of bodies that were inside the tomb. It wasn't a messy pit of death like you might imagine, but rather neatly organized. The bodies were placed in rows and dressed in rich garments. The dead people within the pit of death may have been unwilling sacrifices, people slaughtered to join their master or mistress in the afterlife. The thing about the death pits is that each one was found adjacent to a tomb of someone very important. Most of their names have been lost to history, but Woolley theorized they were nobles, important people in government, high priests, and relations to royalty. Some may even have been royalty. When one of these important people died, they had a large number of their servants killed and then buried next to them in a separate tomb. That way they could serve their masters, even in the afterlife. The big difference with the Great Death Pit is that there were a lot of remains. Whoever died and had these people slaughtered to join them must have been very important. There were 74 people inside, only 6 men and the rest were women. This suggests it was a man who was responsible, a man hoping to enter the afterlife with 68 female servants. Or perhaps concubines. The Wicker Man. The Wicker Man was supposedly used by the old Druids of Europe over 2,000 years ago. According to what Julius Caesar wrote in his commentary of the Gallic War, the Gauls also participated in the terrifying ritual of the Wicker Man. Julius Caesar wrote it, and modern historians have confirmed it. The Gauls were extremely superstitious and had many ritual ceremonies. They supposedly hired the Druids to perform mass sacrifices to entertain their immortal gods. This was before Christianity, in the days when Rome itself was still a hub for pagan activities. But even the Romans didn't go so far as using the Wicker Man. The Wicker Man was a gigantic effigy of a man made of wicker. Picture a massive scarecrow almost 30 feet tall, but hollow. It was spacious, with enough room to cram human beings into its arms, legs, and torso. Dozens of people could supposedly be thrown into the wicker trap, then sealed inside. It would then be burned, and all the people stuck inside the Wicker Man's body would roast alive. It was horrendous and brutal, and it may have really happened. Julius Caesar, as unreliable as his own account may be, could have been right. Modern archaeologists have found evidence of human sacrifice in Iron Age Europe. Men have been found sacrificed in bogs throughout the countryside, such as in Denmark. The only thing is that nobody's ever found evidence of a Wicker Man. We see it mentioned all throughout history, but the physical remains have never been found. Then again, it would be almost impossible to find such evidence, considering everything would have been burned thousands of years ago. Stone Age victims. Archaeologists poking through a Neolithic settlement in western Slovakia recently discovered a horrifying mass grave. There were about 36 bodies inside. But what makes this grave so disturbing was that none of the remains had their heads. They appeared to be the victims of some kind of cultic ceremony, something that has been baffling researchers. The discovery was made at a site in Vrable, believed to be one of the largest Stone Age settlements in Central Europe ever excavated. It's a massive site of over 50 hectares. People lived here between 5250 and 4950 BC. And while lots of interesting things have been found, the discovery of the headless corpses has definitely been the strangest. Other than the bodies, researchers have found over 300 longhouses, a fortification that was built around the settlement before it was abandoned, and a defensive ditch to protect themselves against enemies. It appears that the people here were stable and peaceful up until near the end, when they suddenly needed protection against other tribes. It was excavations in 2022 that revealed the mass grave. 35 individuals who were the victims of cult sacrifice were buried here. They weren't buried very nicely either, with the skeletons found haphazardly as if they had been dumped into the pit without care. There were men, women, and children, but nobody has found where their heads went. The heads were definitely taken from the bodies, but scientists are clueless as to what the Stone Age people did with them afterward. For that matter, no one knows what the point of such a barbaric ritual may have been. Prehistoric herpes. The disturbing prehistoric roots of the cold sore virus have been traced thanks to ancient DNA. As of right now, about 3.7 billion people across the world suffer from the herpes virus, which causes sores to grow on a person's lip. For the first time in history, the ancient genome of that very virus has been sequenced by a team of scientists from the University of Cambridge. One of the samples used in their research came from a young adult male dug out of a medieval graveyard. The individual died in the late 14th century. He suffered a grotesque dental abscess and experienced cold sores. By looking through the ancient DNA, researchers learned that the modern HSV1 strain began about 5,000 years ago. That was around the same time that Bronze Age migrations into Europe from the vast grasslands of Eurasia began. Nobody knows exactly what happened, but the people coming from the grasslands mixing with the Europeans, along with a population boom, caused kissing sores to spread like wildfire. Death of the donkey. In southern Israel, archaeologists discovered the bones of a donkey. It wasn't the most terrifying discovery, but it's still a little creepy to see the bones of a donkey from 3,500 years ago. The skeleton still had a copper bit in its mouth and saddlebags slung over its back. Researchers believe the animal was well liked in its community, and it was likely sacrificed as part of a mysterious ritual in the Bronze Age. Donkeys were extremely valuable animals in ancient Israel. It was thanks to the donkey that caravans were able to create trading networks as far back as the 18th century BC. Small, insulated kingdoms were able to trade their wares a great distance because of donkeys. The pack animals were like the U-Hauls of the Bronze Age. This particular donkey did not participate in any trading. Researchers from Israel's University of Haifa say it didn't do a day of hard labor in its life. There was no evidence that the donkey was driven or ridden for any long period of time. It was only about 4 years old and had likely been somebody's pet or a local resident of the temple where it was found. Researchers believe the donkey was brought up with great respect. then humanely killed as part of a sacrifice to appease the gods. Thanks for watching! Which of these creepy discoveries did you like hearing about the most? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you soon. Bye!